All right. Hey, friends, welcome back. We are talking about 5.16. This is aquaculture. We just wrapped up meat production methods. So this will be a follow-up talking about mass production of fish. Our learning objectives for today are to describe the benefits of aquaculture, to describe the drawbacks of aquaculture, and describe the impacts of aquaculture. So what's aquaculture? Basically, this is farmed fish. So if you've ever been to a restaurant or you've heard someone say, is this farmed or fresh? They're referring to whether the fish was grown under conditions where they were in one large area that was being manipulated by humans to mass feed and mass produce and mass breed. Versus something that was caught in the wild. Now, aquaculture exists for both freshwater and marine species, so you'll see it in both places, and I'll show you sort of what it looks like when we have a freshwater form of aquaculture and a marine one. The important thing to note about any type of aquaculture is that it is a closed system. We are manipulating all of the inputs, and for the most part, there shouldn't be any outputs unless we are talking about something that is a type of marine aquaculture that's existing in an actual ocean still. And I'm going to show you an example of that here. So it's essentially farmed fishing on like a really large scale in order to sort of meet the demands. Now here on the left, you're seeing freshwater, likely a freshwater farmed fish. So you'll see these really large tanks. These tanks are going to host all of your whatever they're trying to grow in large quantities. Possibly within these tanks, you'll see varying age ranges depending on how they've started. This is how they're going to feed them. They will put the food directly in this water. It's where waste will be collected. It's all going to happen in these big tanks. So it's happening in warehouses all over the world. It is one of the fastest growing food production methods here in the United States. And China is actually a leader in aquaculture. Now what you're seeing here is something that's actually happening in an ocean. So this is going to be for more marine-based organisms where you've got basically, and you actually saw it on this first page, these really, really giant nets. So here's the aerial view of it, and here's kind of what those look like underneath. You're going to see these giant nets with fish that have been intentionally placed in them. They cannot get out of the nets. They're stuck in there. And basically people are feeding the fish within these nets. So they're using the ocean they're using the actual ocean water to maintain normal living conditions from the fish, but the fish have been generally genetically modified and are being fed a very specific diet from people who are maintaining these sort of net pod type things. So again, you can kind of see it from the top. You can see that they can easily be moved around by boats, and they can easily go in and feed those fish populations, etc. And then they can collect them, take the fish out, and then sell them. Okay, so what is the purpose of aquaculture? Why do we do it? The biggest reason, of course, is to meet the demands for humans. So as our population grows around the world, there is an increased demand for more fish-based products, more protein-based products, like we just talked about with meat production. And so we require more of it. And so we are finding alternate ways other than fishing from natural sources to try to maintain those standards. One of the reasons why aquaculture first came to be was because of overfishing and too much reduction in natural ecosystems. We were pulling too quickly. The populations weren't able to recover. And so we were like, well, we need somewhere else where we can still meet the demand but not diminish these natural population sizes. And so thus aquaculture was born, and it is where most fish comes from. The other reason that you may start to see farmed fishing or farmed fisheries or aquaculture is if we're trying to rebuild a natural population. So we will, sort of like a zoo, we will cultivate the population in an enclosed area and then release them back in the wild to try to rebuild the natural population, or allow a natural population to rebuild from not fishing in it for a long period of time and only fishing from the aquaculture places. Again, it could help with habitat restoration, like if we are tired of, or if we're worried about a population being depleted, or maybe there was an introduction of an invasive species that ate out a native population. perhaps we're removing the invasive species and we're going to let that population replenish with the native species. That may be another reason. And again, or wild stock enhancement, we've overfished the area and we need to allow it to replenish itself. So that's really why aquaculture was born. But one of the biggest reasons is to just meet the demands of humans as populations grow. So what are the advantages of aquaculture? Why do we like it? Why is it good? We have been, fish harvests have been decreasing worldwide since the 1990s. So we have been depleting natural fisheries for a very long time now. And so the benefit of aquaculture is it actually allows some of those natural fisheries to be able to replenish themselves. It means that we don't have to tap into these natural resources if we can grow fish and maintain them outside of these natural ecosystems without harming the natural population. So it's really not much different than what we're doing with livestock. We're growing we're growing and cultivating mass quantities of livestock in very small areas. So we take up less space. We're not tapping into natural populations, and it's designated specifically for food for people. So it's less possibly of an impact on the environment in terms of overfishing and diminishing biodiversity from those areas. Additionally, aquaculture requires much less space. We can mass grow fish in warehouses. We don't need entire oceans to do it. We don't need to depend on specific climatic conditions. It's going to be very specific, and we can consume less water in the process of doing that. It's also a very efficient process. We can load these fish up with GMOs, make them grow very quickly, make them yield much more meat. We can sell that meat. We don't need that much space to do it. It's very fast. It's very quick. It's very easy. So a very efficient process for us. And then additionally, potentially less fossil fuel inputs than terrestrial agriculture. Aquaculture actually doesn't require as many fossil fuels as something like terrestrial agriculture does. So it's actually more carbon efficient than modern agriculture is. And then again, it could help to mitigate some of the effects of overfishing. So you have to, potentially you're getting a different, you're not getting a fish that came from a natural ecosystem, but you're getting something very similar. So just to give you a look at some data, so this one here on the right is showing you wild fish catch versus aquaculture across the world. So you can see that wild fish catch has largely flattened since the 1990s, which is what we just said. Again, this is largely due to the depletion of the stock in natural ecosystems, and as a result, we have really seen this dramatic, since 1990, this really dramatic increase in the production of aquaculture as a main source for getting fish protein. And then really it has helped to allow us to still consume fish products, even though we have largely overfished a lot of our natural fisheries. And so you can see in 2009, we had this split of percentages that were farm raised versus net wild caught. And now you can see the prediction is that by 2030, so within less than 10 years from now, the majority of fish that is being consumed will outnumber those that are wild caught. So it sounds like a great thing. What are the negative impacts of overfishing? It's very similar to the negative impacts of raising livestock in like a CAFO. Those fish are kept in really close quarters. They're all kind of smashed into those giant nets or those giant tanks. So the density of those fish within them, they're very close together. So that makes it very easy for disease to spread, for parasites to spread. So as a result, those fish need to be pumped filled with antibiotics or antiparasitics. And then of course, once we pump those tanks or those fish full of those, we risk that medication residue contaminating waterways. So if any of the water gets out, then potentially from some of these like large storages, potentially that could be a problem for natural waterways. Additionally, if you're looking at those examples that I showed you here, whatever we're putting into this is going directly into the ocean. So just as you're sort of seeing in this cartoon image, ironically, even though we're trying to save some of these natural fisheries, some of the waste and byproduct from these fish farms is actually harming the ecosystem that is surrounding that area. Additionally, if these fish do get sick and we don't catch the disease in time, potentially that disease can spread onto natural or wild populations of fish nearby. Again, you can imagine if you have all of these fish here in this enclosed net living in an ocean, these fish are producing a lot of waste. They're eating a lot and they are pooping a lot. Their waste is going to contain things like ammonia, nitrogen. Those are both things that once they get into water are going to potentially cause eutrophication from algal blooms, which is then in turn going to lead to hypoxic conditions in the waterway. So if this isn't properly maintained and a lot of fish waste is ending up into the natural ocean, then you'll have, again, problems with natural populations. Now, most of these fish are grain-fed. They're fed a pellet-based food. So unlike other fish populations, which are feeding on other smaller fish within the ocean, these fish are grain-fed, much like livestock is grain-fed. So potentially some of that food is, again, going to end up into oceans, and that can pollute waterways as well. And then lastly, a problem that has happened more than once is if there is some type of tear or hole in this fish and these farmed organisms escape and they go into the wild, they are then going to be competing or interbreeding with wild organisms. This is essentially the introduction of new genes into the gene pool, and they're going to be artificially selected genes versus natural genes. A lot of the fish that are in these fisheries are genetically modified to be either much bigger or withstand very specific conditions. And so now you're going to start to see a type of competition from those fish. They may be bigger fish and perhaps that might be advantageous. It's going to be an intermixing of the gene pool. So we're going to be introducing a non-natural strain of DNA into a natural population of fish. So we don't necessarily know the impacts of manipulating natural selection in that way on a large scale like that. So that could be a potential issue as well. Okay, I think that's it for aquaculture. If you have questions, I'm going to put a link to a TED Talk on the bottom of this Canvas assignment that I think is also really helpful in talking about aquaculture. Okay, let me know if you have questions, and I will see you soon. Thanks.